So it's time to start this symposium. My name is Yusuke Moriguchi from Kyoto University. I'm a co-organizer of this symposium. So this symposium about the development of consciousness. So we will discuss about the development of consciousness in human infants, young children, as well as rats. So first, now Tsuchiya will shortly introduce this symposium. So Tsuchiya-san, please start.
Okay, so that was the opening music for this symposium. That was winner of our prize for the Qualia sound contest. And so today I'm quite happy to introduce this symposium, Development of Consciousness. And we have a fantastic speakers, and we already have received quite a bit of the registrant and also many viewers on YouTube. So the organizer and speaker, Yusuke, has already spoken. So I'll introduce three other speakers in shortly. And just as a housekeeping announcement, we record all these contents of the symposium and distribute it through the YouTube later. And this is currently also broadcasted on YouTube as well. And during the presentation, please turn off your sound, but keeping on video is totally fine. Okay. And then also, please ask questions either using Zoom chat or raising hand or Q&A or leave comments in YouTube comments. And then either during or after this symposium is finished, please use this QR code on the right side to answer some of the questionnaires about this symposium, like how it was perceived, and also, what kind of topic do you want to see in the future, and so on. And then just briefly, I also want to introduce the context of this symposium. This symposium is a part of our transformative research areas supported by the Japanese government, JSPS, called the Qualia Structure Project. I'm the leading this project. My name is now Tsuchiya, and together with other PIs, Makiko, Masafumi, Hayato, and I, Steve, and also Yusuke, today's organizer. We are studying the structure of the qualia and also its brain basis. And on the right side, there will be there are one YouTube channel that features a couple of previous symposia that we held this year on color and so information structure, and another symposium at the Japan Neuroscience meeting. And there are many more contents over there in this channel. And briefly, our Qualia Structure project starts or sort of try to link between the brain and qualia, or consciousness, perception, feeling. And measuring and also manipulating the brain is done by Makiko and I, Koizumi, and then Masafumi and other mathematicians, Hayato and Steve, are trying to come up with the information structure that is relevant for consciousness. And I and also Yusuke are doing some psychophysical experiments to understand the qualia structure through the psychophysics. And one of the structural kind of inspiration in the developmental psychology context is this Piaget's grouping kind of concept, which Yusuke and I and Hayato has been discussing this morning for over maybe 2 hours or something like that. So we are seriously thinking about this mathematical structure of the development of consciousness. So without further ado, today's schedule is that upon my introduction, first Yumiko is going to give a talk on the roles of a visual experience in maturation of neural response in rat visual cortex. And then Yusuke is going to talk about the absence of visual backward masking in early infancy. And then Louise is going to give a talk on core and situated metacognition in infants and kids. And finally, Yusuke is going to give a talk on representing an invisible agent during early childhood. All right, and then that's the end. let's get started.
Okay, Shia-san, thanks for introducing. So now we are starting this symposium. So each speaker has 20 minutes or 25 minutes talk, after which we will receive question so please raise your hand or using a chat to ask question for the speaker. Okay. So first speaker is Yumiko Yoshimura, Professor Yumiko Yoshimura from the National Institute of Physiological Study. So her study is about mechanism underlying information processing and activity-independent functional development in neocortex in rats. So her research is really interesting. So Yoshimura-san, please start.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So, thank you for kind introduction, Moriguchi-san, and thank you for giving me such a good opportunity to introduce our work. So my name is Yumiko Yoshimura from National Institute for Physiological Sciences in Japan. Wait. Okay. I guess I'm studying in the different field from most of you joining here. So let me introduce myself quickly. My specialty is neurophysiology of the visual cortex of rodents, rats, or mice. I have studied organization of neural circuits in the primary visual cortex and the mechanisms of activity-dependent maturation of cortical function using rodents since I was a graduate student. I have not studied the consciousness. However, I am interested in the developmental process of neural circuits underlying visual perception. And today, I will talk about experience-dependent development of visual acuity of rats. And then I will talk about the development of neural circuits and visual responses. We focus on the primary visual cortex because, as you know, the primary visual cortex is the first stage of visual information processing in the neocortex. So maybe it's a first choice. And the first question is, visual experience is required for the development of visual acuity. To examine this, we used 3 groups of adult rats. We examined 2 kinds of deprivation. One is dark rearing. Rats were kept in dark room from the birth until adult. Dark-reared rats are deprived of whole vision, total vision. And the other is binocular deprivation. Rats open eyes at early postnatal developmental stage, around postnatal 14 days. We sutured both eyelids just before eye opening and kept them until adult. Binocularly lit sutured rats lack pattern vision during development. However, they can receive light with low spatial frequency, for example, light on and off. So these 2 deprivations are different conditions. To measure visual acuity, we used a visual discrimination task, a modified version of Morse water maze. Rats were trained to associate a visual cue with the location of hidden escape platform in Y maze. Grating was shown on one screen, and uniform gray lights were shown on the other screen. The hidden escape platform was placed on the side of the grating screen. Initially, rats were trained using a grating with a low spatial frequency and high contrast, clearly visible stimulus. I show you one trial using a low spatial frequency grating in normal rat. So it looks easy. Next, this case is a moderate spatial frequency. It's more difficult than previous one, but he succeeded. Finally, we used a higher spatial frequency. It's much more difficult. And he failed. So these show average learning curve for grading discrimination task. Normal rats easily learned this task. Percentage of correct choice reached to almost 100% on the third day of training. We also trained dark-haired rats. The rats took more time to learn it compared to normal one, and they were able to learn 2 days long. We also test visual acuity in binocularly deprived rats. To examine visual acuity, we opened both sutured eyes and started training. Binocular sutured rats could not discriminate the difference between the two stimuli. The percentage of correct choice remained at the chance level during the training period, like this. Therefore, we could not measure visual acuity of rats after binocular deprivation using this behavioral test. It indicates that binocular deprivation severely impaired visual acuity. Here is my interpretation. It has been reported that dark layering extends a critical period of visual cortical plasticity. So dark-haired rats can regain the delay of development during training. Binocular deprivation does not extend the critical period. The critical period normally terminates. I think that binocular deprived rats cannot perceive visual pattern even after training. So we found that normal visual experience during postnatal development is required for an increase in visual acuity. And it's difficult to know whether rats, which can detect visual orientation correctly, have visual consciousness or not. As you know, at present, it's a big open question whether visual experience during postnatal development is necessary for the establishment of visual perception in animals or not. Next, I will talk about the development of neural circuits and visual responses. Potentially underlying the development of visual acuity and the decrease after deprivation. To examine age dependence, we used two groups of normal rats, immature rats, and 3-week-old rats. Normal rats at this age show clear visual response selectivity, almost similar to adult rats. In addition, we used age-matched dark-haired rats and binocular sutured rats. To analyze functional neural connections, synaptic connections, we conducted slice-patch clamp recording. we prepared acute living slices, including the primary visual cortex. And you can see two pyramidal neurons here on the living slice. We targeted identified neurons on a slice for particle recordings to analyze functional neural circuits. Okay, I don't have enough time to show in detail today, so I'm showing only a summary of circuit analysis here. This cartoon shows the neural circuit in the primary visual cortex of normal rats. Triangles or circles show individual neurons. When two pyramidal neurons in layer 2 and 3 are synaptically connected, these neurons preferentially share excitatory input from other neurons, from neighboring neurons, to create a group of cells shown in red. That is a fine-scale subnetwork. When two neurons did not connect, like a red and blue neurons, they belong to different subnetworks. Each subnetwork shares input from different groups of layer 4 neurons. In immature cortex or dark-layered cortex, individual synaptic connections are weak and very sparse, and fine-scale networks are not organized within the primary visual cortex. Neuronal circuits after dark layering are similar to the immature states. So neural circuits in dark-layered rats may have a potential to regain the delay of functional development, like visual acuity development I introduced. Interestingly, binocular deprivation does not impair making individual synaptic connections. So diffuse light through eyelids is enough to make individual synaptic connection. However, we did not find cell grouping, and the organization of fine-scale networks is impaired. During binocular deprivation, individual synaptic connections may develop based on meaningless visual inputs without pattern information. Our next question is, what is the effect of visual deprivation on visual responses? To this end, we conducted synchronized recording from multiple neurons in vivo primary visual cortex. We applied visual stimulation with a combination of various directions and various spatial frequencies to drive spikes like them. This is an example of spatial frequency tuning and orientation tuning in a recorded neuron of immature cortex. These are examples from normal, dark-layered, and binocularly deprived rats at the age of 3 weeks. Each neuron shows clear spatial frequency here and clear orientation selectivity. So each neuron shows clear selectivity. And we found no significant differences in spatial frequency selectivity and orientation selectivity among 4 groups of rats. So visual responses in individual neurons are already established shortly after eye opening, regardless of visual experience. And next, we focused on synchronization in a population of neurons. This shows EPSCs from a single layer 4 neuron to a single postsynaptic layer 5 neurons. And this is an example of connected pair. Presynaptic action potential induced EPSP, excitatory postsynaptic potential. The scale here is 2 millivolt, and the amplitude is very small. EPSP amplitude distribution overlapped with background noise. In neocortex, including visual cortex, synaptic inputs from a single presynaptic cell have a small impact on the postsynaptic cell. As I mentioned before, synaptic input from a single neuron is very weak. So, synchronous firing in multiple presynaptic cells is effective for driving postsynaptic neurons due to the spatial and temporal summation of excitatory inputs. Asynchronous inputs are not summated, so the impact is smaller to induce output signals in the postsynaptic cell. So we analyzed the degree of synchrony of visually evoked spikes simultaneously recorded to neurons with cross-correlation analysis. We calculated time difference of spikes between two simultaneously recorded neurons and made cross-correlogram. If spikes in two neurons occur concurrently, the time difference should be 0. According to the peak at the time around 0, we assessed the degree of spike synchrony. These show examples of cross-correlogram obtained from 4 groups of animals. Clear peak appeared in normal cortex at this age. And this shows the proportion of significantly synchronous pairs. The synchronous pair increased with age and normal development. This increment was blocked by either type of deprivation. And this is average peak area, reflecting the strength of synchronous firing in synchronous pairs. The strength of synchrony increased with age, and in binocularly deprived group, the peak area also increased. We correlated the spike synchrony to the similarity of visual responses, visual response selectivity in neuron pairs. This is an example of visual responses in a pair of simultaneously recorded neurons, cell 1 and cell 2 of normal rats. And these show the normalized visual responses to each combination of spatial frequency and directions, orientations. In this pair, direction tuning here and spatial frequency tuning were similar. And the visual response of the pair were well synchronized. You can see clear peak in the cross-correlogram. This is another example of a pair showing dissimilar visual responses. A direction tuning curve and the spatial frequency tuning curve did not overlap. This dissimilar pair has no significant synchronization. The proportion of synchronous pair was much higher in similar pair than in dissimilar pair. And the peak area strength of synchrony was also higher in pairs with similar visual responses in normal rats, normal animals. And this is an example from postnatal 13 to 15 days. And the pair showed similar visual responses, but there is no peak, no synchronous responses. The feature selective synchronization was underdeveloped at this age, postnatal 13 to 15 days. The difference in the proportion of synchronous pair between similar and dissimilar pairs was smaller compared to 3-week-old rats. The difference in peak area was also small. Feature selective synchronization was not observed after visual deprivation here and here. These are examples of similar pair after dark layering and after binocular deprivation. Even in similar pairs, you cannot see a peak in the cross-correlogram after deprivation. So our result suggests that pattern vision is required for the establishment of feature selective synchronization. Again, our result demonstrated that feature selective synchronization develops in normal rats. It was impaired by binocular deprivation or dark layering. So it is likely that output signals to the higher order cortex are failed after visual deprivation. Lacking visual deprivation in higher order cortex may be one of the possibilities of low visual acuity after visual deprivation. Okay, today I will talk about the development of visual acuity. Visual acuity decreased after visual deprivation, and establishment of fine-scale networks and feature selective synchronization in multiple neurons were impaired after visual deprivation. Okay, and this is my lab. The almost all experiments I introduced today are conducted by Ayako Ishikawa. Thank you for your kind attention. I'd be happy to answer your question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much for your beautiful talk, Yoshimura-san. So if you have any question, please raise your hand or chat. Actually, you can ask. Okay, Jason, please go first.
Yeah, okay. I mean, if there is any other question, I can go later. But just a start. Yeah, thank you for the beautiful data and talk. It's very clear. One thing I was not so sure was that in your initial slides, schematic slide, you show that the binocular deprived rats will have a sort of a connection to everybody. Yeah, this one. And if that's the case, then I was thinking that the pairs of the synchronous firing or the connected pair may increase after the binocular deprivation, but that one decreased, right?
Yeah, but I didn't explain enough today. So by the proportion of connection probability is similar between normally layered and binocularly deprived rats. The number of connection is almost the same, and the strength of synaptic connection are also the same between normally layered and binocularly deprived rats. So individual connection is looks normal, but the specificity are impaired. specific connection was not observed to create subnetworks.
I see. So in response to some kind of patterned input, because these similar preferential neurons are not connected to each other, it doesn't give rise to this strong output. That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nakashima-san, please.
Okay. Thank you for great talk. So yeah, I have a question about this slide, and so I'm wondering. So the receptive field of the neurons in fine scale networks are same, and the location of receptive field are same within the neurons of this fine scale subnetwork.
Maybe almost the same, because the network are overlapped in the cortex. So maybe share the location of receptive field.
I see. So so these connections are kind of a short range connections rather than long range connections.
Yes.
Yes, I see. And I have a okay. So I have another question. So I think your results suggest that the layer 2 and 3 has a role in kind of object processing or pattern vision. Yeah, and I'm wondering what's the role of layer 5 or 6 or deep layer in visual perception.
Thank you for asking it. So of course, layer 5 neuron or layer 6 neuron show clear feature selective synchronization. But I'd like to show you some data. So here is the synchronization in the lower layer. And lower layer also show feature selective synchronization here. However, age-dependent development also occur even in lower layer. However, the development is not necessary of visual experience during the critical period. And lower layer neuron, it is known that lower layer neurons send inputs to subcortical area. So I guess the connection from cortex to subcortical area did not depend on visual experience during development. So, but I don't know why these connections is not required for the development or the visual experience during development.
Okay, I see. I understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for wisdom. Next is Tony, please.
Yes, thank you. That was lovely data. I had a question around whether all of the effects you saw were a change in pattern visual activity, because when you dark rear, the animals are going to change their circadian rhythms. They'll use their somatosensory system more with their whiskers in the cage, and maybe even binocular deprivation will change their physical activity in the cage, just like dark rearing. I'm wondering if there could be broader effects on cortical maturation and plasticity, thinking of the Maffei Italian result where they massaged the rodents and changed the rate of visual maturation.
Yes. Yes. So, massaging or enriched environment enhance the visual response development. So, and dark layered rats, at least dark-layered rats are generally healthy, and it is reported that dark-layered rats in visual cortex of dark-layered rats can respond enhanced auditory responses. So maybe cross-modal plasticity occur, but I haven't examined that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, but that's interesting. So you may suggest that if you enrich like auditory and so much sensory and smell and so on, after depriving visual, you may still some kind of compensate for the circuit property potentially. Ah, that's interesting. Okay. Yusuke, do you want to take the YouTube question?
Yeah, so final question is maybe quick question from the YouTube. So Yoshimura-san, so
yes.
Question is what exactly is a binocular deprivation? So you have already mentioned a little bit about binocular deprivation, but can you explain a bit more about what exactly is binocular deprivation in your study?
Yeah. You mean the experience, the difference in experience between binocular deprivation and...
I think it's the operational definition.
Or what you have done in your experiment or something. I don't know.
Something like that, yeah.
So binocular deprivation, we sutured both sides just before eye opening.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I answer your question?
Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah.
And I have the data. Here is the filter effect of sutured eyelid on visual input. So in the condition of binocular deprivation, low spatial frequency information are all intact, but high spatial frequency information are severely impaired. So we think that low spatial and frequency and no orientation information applied under the deprivation, under binocular deprivation.
Yeah, great. I think it's enough. Yeah, thanks for your explanation. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now it's time to go to the next. So, Yoshimura-san, thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next speaker is Nakashima-san. So Nakashima-san is postdoc fellow in the Chuo University. So his interest is about maybe infants and adults' visual perception. So Nakashima-san, please start your talk.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to join this symposium. My name is Yusuke Nakashima. I'm a postdoc of Infant Vision Lab at Chuo University. So today, I would like to talk about our study on visual backward masking in preverbal infants. Okay, so previous studies on visual development have revealed that basic visual functions develop drastically during the first year of life. So this right graph shows that developmental change in synaptic density in human visual cortex. And so we can see a sharp increase in synapses from birth to around 8 months. And during this period, visual perception also changes qualitatively. So in this talk, I will tell you one of the qualitative changes in the visual system revealed by backward masking. So visual backward masking is a perceptual phenomenon in which a visual stimulus called target is rendered invisible by a mask stimulus presented after the target. So this is the metacontrast masking one type of backward masking. So first, a target is presented briefly, and after that, a mask stimulus, which does not spatially overlap the target, is presented. And when the SOA between the target and the mask is from around 30 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds, we cannot see the target. So backward masking is used as a tool for exploring the temporal dynamics of visual perception. So we can estimate what is happening in the brain from stimulus onset until conscious visual perception emerges by using backward masking. The neurophysiological studies show that backward masking interferes late activities of neural responses in the visual cortex. So these are neural responses of a V1 neuron of monkeys during masking task. So the two upper graphs are responses when only a target is presented, and the mask and the target and the mask are presented simultaneously. So in these conditions, the monkey can perceive the target, and we can see two peaks of responses. But when the mask is presented after the target, in which the monkey cannot see the target due to masking, the late activity is reduced selectively. So from these results, major models of backward masking hypothesize that backward masking disrupts recurrent processing from higher visual areas to lower visual areas. So these masking studies and other recent neuroscience studies suggest that recurrent processing plays a critical role in visual perception. But the development of recurrent processing is poorly understood. So we addressed this issue by using backward masking. We used object substitution masking, OSM, another type of backward masking. So this is also called common onset masking. In this masking, target perception is impaired when a target is presented with a surrounding 4-dot mask, and then the mask remains on screen after the target disappears, like this. This is delayed mask offset condition. In this condition, we are not aware of the target, and the target appears to be replaced by a blank. But when the target and mask disappear simultaneously, target can be perceived. So this type of masking is also thought to occur because the integration of feedback and feed-forward signals is interfered. And in fact, MEG study shows that recurrent activity in the early visual cortex is moderated when a target cannot be perceived because of OSM. So we used OSM in this study. And there are important findings about the development of recurrent pathways. So anatomical studies of postmortem brains in human infants show that the development of recurrent pathways is slower than feed-forward pathways. By 4 months of age, feed-forward connections between V1 and V2 are relatively mature, and that is, the adult-like laminar termination pattern emerges. But feedback and horizontal connections are still immature at that age. And particularly, the recurrent connections terminating in superficial layers are immature in younger infants. So these findings imply that until around this age, recurrent processing is immature, and visual information may be processed mainly in a feed-forward manner. But this possibility has not been examined so far. So we tested this possibility. We hypothesized that if recurrent processing is immature and visual information is processed in a feed-forward manner in early infancy, OSM might not occur in younger infants. That is, if infants do not have recurrent processing, mask stimulus cannot interfere processing of the target stimulus. So in other words, we tested whether younger infants can perceive a stimulus that older infants cannot see because of masking. We examined OSM in infants at 3 to 8 months of age. Okay, so we use the preferential looking paradigm with face stimuli. So in the simultaneous offset condition, a face and a 4-dot mask disappear simultaneously. So this is a masked condition. And in the delayed mask offset condition, the mask remained on the screen after the face disappeared. So this is the masked condition. And this stimulus sequence is repeated 10 times in a trial for each condition. And we measured infants' looking time at the monitor screen during the trial and compared it between the two conditions. So it is known that infants prefer faces. So if OSM occurs, a face stimulus cannot be perceived in the delayed mask offset condition, and looking time would be longer in the simultaneous offset condition. And trials of these two conditions were presented alternately and were repeated 5 times. Okay, so the upper graphs show the looking time in each trial, and the lower graph shows the total looking time of 5 trials for each condition. So as you can see, looking time was longer in the simultaneous offset condition in 7 to 8 months old infants, but there was no difference in 3 to 6 months old infants. So this suggests that OSM occurs in 7 to 8 month old infants, but not in 3 to 6 month old infants. But we cannot conclude that masking does not occur in younger infants based only on the non-significant results. So next, to further test the absence of OSM in younger infants, we compare the no-face and delayed mask offset conditions. These are the same as the first experiment, except that face was not presented at the target position in the no-face condition. So in this case, if OSM does not occur, a face can be perceived in the delayed mask offset condition, and looking time would be longer in the delayed mask offset condition than in the no-face condition. So we found that the looking time was longer in the delayed mask offset condition in 3 to 6 months old infants, but not different in 7 to 8 months old infants. So these results suggest OSM is ineffective for 3 to 6 months old infants, and younger infants can perceive faces that older infants cannot because of masking. And we also tested if OSM is ineffective even with a stronger mask stimulus in younger infants. So the 4-dot mask is a very sparse mask and may have been insufficiently strong to cause OSM in younger infants in the first and second experiments. So we use a stronger mask, elliptical counter like this. So similar to the previous experiment, if OSM does not occur, looking time in the delayed mask offset conditions would be longer. And we examined only 5 to 6 months old infants in this experiment. But the results replicated those of the second experiment. the looking time was longer in the delayed mask offset condition. So we could confirm that OSM is ineffective even with a stronger mask in younger infants. Okay, so from these experiments, we found that OSM occurs in 7 to 8 months old infants, but not in 3 to 6 months old infants. And this means younger infants can perceive objects that older infants cannot see due to masking. And OSM is thought to interfere recurrent processing, and recurrent connections are immature at least until around 4 months. So given these previous findings, we suggest that OSM is ineffective to younger infants because recurrent processing is immature. And our results suggest that the algorithm for visual perception drastically changes in the second half of the first year. So in younger infants, visual processing is performed through a feed-forward system, while in older infants, it is performed through the system incorporating recurrent loops like adults. And our results show that stimulus that can be perceived in early infancy becomes imperceptible during development. But this might be a little counterintuitive. So we infer that some functions would be acquired by incorporating recurrent processing. So for example, recurrent processing is shown to be related to the ability to integrate local information into a global context, such as figure ground segregation, illusory contour, and surround suppression. And infant studies have shown that these functions are acquired at around 6 months. So the time course is consistent with the present study. And another important function is predictive processing, like predictive coding. So these models hypothesize that the visual system integrates top-down predictions carried by recurrent pathways with sensory inputs to resolve perceptual ambiguity. And in fact, recurrent processing is shown to be necessary for robust perception of ambiguous stimuli, such as occluded objects. So in early infancy, such predictive mechanisms may be immature and perception might be vulnerable to ambiguity of visual inputs. So we could say, in return for susceptibility to backward masking, we acquire these important functions. Okay, so, and I'd like to also discuss the development of consciousness, that's the theme in this symposium. So visual masking is a tool for studying conscious perception in adults, but it is difficult to study consciousness in infants because they cannot use verbal reports. So actually, we avoid using the term consciousness in our study. So can we estimate infants' consciousness from their looking behavior? So in principle, it is difficult to determine if a preference to a specific stimulus is based on a conscious perception or a kind of reflexes. So face preference measured in our study is observed even in newborns. So orienting to faces in newborns is thought to be mediated by a subcortical system. So orienting faces, does not necessarily indicate conscious perception. But face perception is processed cortically at least from 3 to 5 months. And OSM interferes cortical visual processing. So face preference measured in our study is probably related to cortical processing. But cortical processing is not a sufficient condition for conscious perception. So we cannot conclude that our results reflect infant's conscious perception. Anyway, I'd like to try to discuss the relationship between recurrent processing and consciousness here, assuming that our results are partly related to conscious perception. So Lame proposes that recurrent processing in the visual pathway is necessary for conscious perception. So if this hypothesis is true, younger infants whose recurrent processing is immature might not have conscious experience. And so in this case, perceptual processing does not elicit conscious experience, but provides visual information, which is processed by the feed-forward system to the motor system directly. So infant behavior, like orienting to a specific stimulus, might be able to be explained by kind of this system without conscious experience. And I think there can be another more moderate interpretation. So younger infants have conscious perception, but it is different from that of adults. So in this case, what aspect of consciousness is different between infants and adults? So content of conscious experience or mechanisms for generating conscious experience. And in terms of the later case, for example, it is possible that in infants, conscious perception might be more difficult to arise than adults. That is, conscious perception of ambiguous stimuli might be difficult to arise in infants, as mentioned earlier. But these are difficult to answer now for me, so I'd like to just raise the issue here. Okay, so I'd like to summarize our study. We found that infants at 3 to 6 months of age are immune to OSM. And this means younger infants can perceive objects that older infants cannot see due to masking. And this suggests that in infants at 6 months and younger, recurrent processing is immature and visual information might be processed mainly in a feed-forward manner. And we infer that some important visual functions will be acquired in return for susceptibility to backward masking by acquiring recurrent processing. For example, the ability to integrate local information into a global context and robust perception of ambiguous stimuli. Okay, so I'd like to end by thanking the members of Yamaguchi Labo. Thank you for listening.
Nakashima-san, thank you so much for your interesting talk. So, do you have any question? Okay, I'll go first. So, I have 2 quick questions. Okay.
Yeah.
So, why haven't you done 3 or 4 months old in experiment 3?
Yeah.
Have you conducted experiment?
I haven't done the experiment. Yeah. So, ideally, we should have do the experiment this experiment in the 3 to 4 months old infants, but I think 5 to 6 months old infants is sufficient to show the absence of OSM in this experiment. So I think so. Of course, 5 to 6 months old infants more develop than 3 to 4 months old infants. So if 5 to 6 months old infants in 5 to 6 months old infants OSM does not occur, I infer that younger 3 to 4 months old infants, OSM would not occur.
Okay, but the brain mortality data is kind of 4 months is very important for the OSM, right? So I think if you we'd like to address the relationship between behavioral data, brain data. I think 3 or 4 months of data is also needed to address.
I see.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, Louise, please.
Hi, thanks a lot for the great talk. Really interesting and really great data. It's quite interesting. I think that you see a developmental shift at 5 months old, given also evidence that there is a developmental shift in the P300 when perceiving faces in babies around this age as well. But my question was just, I was wondering how you think that your results relate to the fact that we know also that babies undergo a change in first perception around like between 6 and 9 months with perceptual narrowing. So their perception becomes more specific for faces in this same age range. So I was just wondering what you think about this and how this may relate to your findings somehow.
Okay. So your question is about the relationship between our result and perceptual narrowing. Okay. So and so the previous studies, like in this graph, perceptual narrowing typically is thought to occur after 8 months and after 9 months or and so the previous study have shown that kind of basic visual perception, basic visual functions develop until 8 months, and so perceptual narrowing is related to the functions perceptual narrowing is related to the functions that to adapt the environment in the infants. So, for example, so face perception of racial effect. So it is related to the perceptual narrowing, and so to adapt environment, the process to adapt environment is related to perceptual narrowing. But I think the processing that we examined in this study is more general or basic functions of processing, unlike the perceptual narrowing. So I infer that the processing that we examined is related to might not related to the perceptual narrowing or before perceptual narrowing. The development occurs, I think. Okay. Thank you.
Are you okay, Louise? Fine. Okay. Okay, next, Chair-san, go.
Yeah, I'll just go quickly. Really, thanks. Great talk, because it really connects between Yumiko's talk and also next probably Louise's talk. I think how to understand the infant's response in terms of consciousness and so on. But with respect to this figure, and also in terms of the connection, I'm also interested in the relation with Yumiko's study. So maybe Yumiko may be able to answer this as well. But it's been always, surprising to see this kind of developmental stage of the face to appear before orientation, right? So I was wondering if something similar is also kind of observed in rats or any other animals that recognition of biologically extremely significant kind of thing, like, conspecific body or shape of the face appears before orientation or shape or color perception. And if that's the case, then, in these animals, we would probably know the development of the microcircuitry. So if something like that has been already studied in either monkey or rats or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So, sorry. So your question is about the. So I couldn't catch why your question.
Yeah, maybe probably if you go back a couple of slides.
Okay.
There,
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
at the birth, face appears, right? In the case of human.
Yeah.
But it is something similar also, observed or reported in animals. That's the short version of the question.
Animal.
Because this is very strange.
Okay, so yeah, and so in this graph, so this face means so the development of face processing is there are two processes of face perception during development, and so in this face processing is subcortical systems, and so newborns prefer the faces, and so this is thought to be mediated by a subcortical system, and so the previous study shows that newborns prefer the top-heavy structure. So there are two dots in the upper part, and one dot. There is one dot in the lower part. So the kind of this structure, but about from 3-month-old infants, they don't prefer that kind of top-heavy structure, but prefer real face. So so many infant researchers think that first, face perception is processed by the subcortical system, but around 3 or 4 months, from around 3 to 4 months, face perception is processed cortically, and so those are different process of face perception.
I see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yumiko may say something.
Yoshimura-san, please.
Thank you. First, related to Choi-san's question, I don't know the development of face processing in rats or mice, but recently, rats also have facial expression. So maybe it's a new field to analyze the development of face recognition, even in rodents. Just my comment. And I have a question. Maybe the ventral pathway involved in the OSM, right?
Yes, right.
So do you think which higher order area, recurrent connections, is involved in OSM?
Yes.
Is it ventral pathway and so on?
Yeah. So some neuroscience studies show that OSM is related to the V1 and lateral occipital cortex, like LOC, but all OSM studies all neuroscience study in OSM is about only human, and so they use ERP or MEG. So the precise location related to the OSM is not understood, but several studies show that the interaction between V1 or early visual cortex and maybe lateral occipital cortex or IT areas. Yeah, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other question or comments? Okay. So thanks, Nakashima-san. Thanks so much for your interesting talk.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Louise Goupil. She is a research fellow in the University of East London. Her research is about infants' metacognition. So please start with.
Can you see my screen all right?
Yeah, I can see.
Sorry.
We are seeing your presenter slides. Yeah. So
Sorry.
yeah, swap.
Yeah, that should be better now. Sorry. Is this all right now?
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry about that. So hi, everyone, and thanks for the invitation on the great symposium. It's been great to hear these talks, and I'm going to be jumping in time now and talking about slightly older infants, and I'm also going to change topic a little bit because my talk is more specifically about metacognition. So I'll just define metacognition quickly to start with, because this is a term that is often used to refer to very different things. So I find it quite useful to do that to start with. So in my mouth, metacognition refers to all of the mental processes and mental representations whereby agents evaluate the quality of their cognitive representations and processes and use this second order kind of information to regulate subsequent cognitive activities such as learning, remembering, perceiving, and so on, and thus ultimately their behavior. And metacognition can thus be seen as one of the facets of consciousness, and like the ways in which metacognition and consciousness are related is really a matter of debate. So I'm not actually going to go into that in my presentation, but we can discuss this maybe at the end of the talk. And before I go on, I also want to give just a few examples. So the definition I've given is maybe a bit abstract for some of you. So I'll just give a few examples of what this actually typically refers to in real life, so to speak. So metacognition can be prospective, for instance. So this will be when, for instance, you're trying to study something or to learn something, and you are able to estimate whether you will be able to remember this, in which case you can move on and maybe go and learn something else. But on the other hand, you may also, when you're learning something, realize that you don't know if you will be able to remember this later, and in which case you can decide to study more. Another example of metacognition is when you make an error, like this lady, for instance, turning left rather than turning right when she's driving. So metacognition can also refer to this kind of processes where you detect and correct your errors, and especially in the absence of environmental feedback on your performances. So this is when you detect that you made an error just on the basis of purely internal evaluations of your decisions. And finally, metacognition has a very important social roles in humans. So we routinely, when we share information with others, also share our confidence in this information. So for instance, if I'm telling my friends that I think another firm's coming tomorrow, I will probably modulate what I'm saying as a function of whether I am sure that she's coming tomorrow or whether I think she's coming tomorrow, but I'm not sure at all. So all humans do this in very different ways as a function of their cultural background and also linguistic background. And this is also a very core function of metacognition. So the question that I'm really interested in my research is to try and understand how and when metacognition develops across developments. And what I'm going to do in this talk is first present two main findings of the developmental literature, or two observations that I will then use to try and build a tentative model of how metacognition may develop in young children. So the two observations are the following. So the first observation is an observation that has been made repeatedly across various types of tasks since the investigations in the development of metacognition have started actually a while ago in the 70s. And it's the finding that actually when you ask young children to provide metacognitive reports and to justify their beliefs verbally, they tend to show a lot of overconfidence, and they tend to show very poor metacognitive skills in the surface when you ask them to talk about their own performances, learning, and so on. So this has been shown, for instance, in the classic appearance reality task, where you show children a box of Smarties, and if you ask them at that point what they think is in the box, typically they will say Smarties are in the box. And then if you show them that actually this object is deceiving because it actually contains pencils, and if you ask the children again, what did you think was in the box, they would tend to say, I thought pencils were in the box. So they tend to show overconfidence in their past knowledge about what was in the box of Smarties. Another classical example of this is in a box task where you show two objects to children, so a ball and a pig in this case, and then you hide the toys out of view in the box. So there is a 50-50% chance that the ball is in the box and a 50% chance that the pig is in the box. And if you ask children below 4 years or even 5 years of age what they think is in the box, they will tend to, if they know what is in the box, they will tend to say that they know what is in the box, even though they actually have only a 50% chance of knowing what's in the box. So these are just two examples, and there are really many more that suggest that young children actually struggle to report their confidence, for instance, through language until at least 4 or 5 years of age, and that in particular they show overconfidence biases when they do so. And on the other hand, we have more recent studies that have shown contrasting set of findings that have revealed that actually if you use nonverbal measures, you can see that young children seem to engage in metacognitive monitoring and control during very simple tasks. So I'm just going to show you one example of this from my own work, but there are other studies out there showing similar patterns. So this is a study that we did together with Sid Quider and Margot Roman-Monnier in 2016, and in which we were interested in whether toddlers can share their doubts with others. So in this study, what we had were 20-month-old babies, and they were playing a hide and seek game with an experimenter. So the experimenter was hiding a toy under one or the other boxes on the right. And then she was closing the curtain for a certain delay before reopening the curtain for the children and asking the child where he wanted or she wanted to look for the toy. And what we did in this task is that we modulated task difficulty for children. So we had two main conditions, a possible condition and an impossible condition. So in the impossible condition, the toy is actually hidden out of view. So there is a 50% chance of guessing where the toy is, but it's actually impossible to solve the task with a 100% accuracy. But on the other hand, in the possible condition, the toy is hidden in view. But what we did here is also vary task difficulty by manipulating the duration of the memorization that children had to achieve in order to recover the toy. So the delay was varied from 3 seconds, which should be rather easy for them, to 12 seconds, which is actually quite difficult for them at this age. And crucially, what we had were two groups of babies. So we had a control group in which children could only solve the task by themselves, so point towards one or the other box when asked where the toy was hidden. But we had a second, and this is the crucial group, test group, in which children were shown during a familiarization phase that they could ask their caregiver for help. So they were shown that if they looked at their caregivers in the eye, the caregiver would tell them essentially where the toy was. And the rationale behind this is that if children at this age can already monitor and share their own uncertainty with others by looking at them, for instance, infants in the test group should ask for help specifically to avoid making mistakes. So they should, when they point, perform better than the toddlers in the control group. And they should also point ask for help, preferentially as the task difficulty increases. So as potentially they experience more doubt. So first, we looked at whether indeed toddlers ask for help more often as a function of task difficulty. And here we found that indeed they ask for help more often in impossible condition than in the possible condition, which could suggest that they indeed ask for help more often when they are in doubt than when they actually know where the toy is. But there was a limitation with this, which is that actually the familiarization phase where we show them that they can ask for help was done using impossible trials. So it could have been that infants simply learned that the correct behavior in this setting was to look towards their caregiver when the curtain was closed during the hiding. So this is not completely conclusive. But interestingly, we also found that as the memorization delay increases, infants started to ask for help more often, which again is congruent with the idea that they were asking for help primarily when in doubt or when they realized they had forgotten the toy location. And this cannot really be explained by any form of reinforcement or simple association between the delay and looking towards the parent, because there were only 8 trials. So it's quite unlikely that babies learned to associate in a purely associative fashion the duration of the curtain closing and with the fact of asking for help. But more crucially, what we found was also that in the test group, children having the possibility to ask for help when in doubt actually allow them to perform better than babies in the control group. And this was especially due to the fact that they were making less mistakes. So here you see for possible trials the rates of correct responses with the circle and incorrect responses with the triangle. And what you can see is that toddlers in both groups made the same rate of correct responses, but they made less mistakes in the test group, which is quite suggestive of them avoiding to respond when they were in doubt. But they were actually responding when they knew, and this allowed them to strategically adapt their decision-making as a function of uncertainty. So this is one example, and as I said, there are other studies that suggest that non-verbally and just through behavior, children seem to engage. We can find manifestations that suggest that children already engage in forms of metacognitive monitoring and control much earlier in development, much earlier, as opposed to what you can find when you ask them to report on their own performances verbally. So now I want to try and think about how to reconcile these two observations and propose a tentative model that we have been developing with the Circuiter and that I have carried on developing more recently as well. So the first proposal that we made to try and explain why young children may have these very basic and early abilities is that we are, as a species, endowed with core metacognitive abilities understood as a biological adaptation that allows us to evaluate the reliability of our own cognitive activities internally and to regulate subsequent cognition accordingly. And we have suggested this because there's also an accumulating body of research in other primates that show that we are not unique in this ability. So this is an ability that is at least shared with other species of primates and perhaps even other mammals. So there are quite a few studies with rats as well. So we have suggested that this capacity is there as a biological adaptation, which is not to say that infants are born with this ability already fully functional and ready, because of course there will be some brain structures that support this competence that would only mature across development. And we know that from other studies and also from animal studies that the brain structures that support core forms of metacognition are actually undergo a protracted development from birth all the way until adolescence. But what we have found in the past was that some of these structures are already functional enough to support core forms of metacognition towards the end of the first year of life. So for instance, we have found that the error-related negativity, which is a potential that relates to error monitoring and that is supported by the, that is originating in the anterior cingulate cortex, is already displayed by 12-month-old infants when they make an error. And there is some evidence that there is, however, some evidence that other brain areas, in particular the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, that is also really important for metacognitive monitoring, undergoes a very slow maturation, and it carries on actually maturating all the way up until adolescence. And this is related to improvements in metacognitive monitoring. This core metacognitive system matures slowly across childhood, hand in hand with the slow maturation of supporting neural networks and structures, in particular brain structures that are located in the medial prefrontal cortex. And this is probably one of the reasons why we see that even after 4 years of age, children have sometimes troubles monitoring their own competencies and learning and so on. But now I would like to suggest that another really important factor is that is limiting children's ability to report their own competence and learning and so on verbally, or to provide metacognitive reports, is the fact that this requires forms of metacognition that are actually situated. And I define situated metacognition as a complex set of learned competencies that allow agents to select, experience, and use core metacognitive signals as a function of their situation within a specific environment and social cultural setting. So if you think back about the studies that I presented in the beginning of my talk, that are typically used with children, these require a lot of pragmatic competencies, and they also require, of course, to have linguistic knowledge about how to share confidence with others and to calibrate one's own confidence with others in order to share it adequately. So these studies, I think, illustrate the fact that sharing confidence through others via explicit reports and linguistic reports actually requires a lot of social learning and environmental and social cultural shaping. And what I'm not going to go into the details of the models of the model, but what I would like to do now is quickly flash out a few of the aspects of the complex and multifaceted developmental process that allow children to acquire this system of situated metacognition. So the first developmental process, I think, is a process of selection. So it's not because young children are able to evaluate confidence in very simple tasks that they would necessarily prioritize this type of signals over other signals. And there is quite a lot of research in children that suggests that initially metacognitive signals such as error signals and competence signals and confidence signals are not super salient for children, as opposed to other signals such as having a desire to succeed or even just having a desire for social conformity. So what children need to do then is to learn to prioritize and select and attach height and value to these metacognitive signals. Then the second thing that children need to do in order to be able to form explicit meta-representations that they can share with others is that they need to ground these cognitive core metacognitive signals into a sense of self, so that they can form meta-representations such as, I believe that I'm going to succeed, or I think that I made a mistake, so this is me, an agent situated in time and space that made this mistake and that is experiencing this core confidence signal. And what we know from the developmental literature is that there is a developmental shift around 18 months in this ability to engage in self-awareness. So this is seen, for instance, in the fact that children around this age start to use personal pronouns more often, and also they pass the mirror task, where they are placed in front of a mirror and start touching a mark that has been placed on their front head surreptitiously. So, and there are more data now also starting to show that passing the mirror task is related to activity, functional connectivity in the default mode network. So there seems to be a developmental shift around 18 months of age in self-awareness, and how this is related to an ability to, for instance, express confidence is not known at the moment. So we need more studies to connect these two areas of research together. But one thing that is for sure is that having this type of meta-representations that I'm presenting here requires a sense of self-awareness like this. So this is something that children must acquire in order to report their confidence to others. The third process that is, I think, really important is that children need to learn how to convert analog confidence signals or analog core metacognitive signals into discrete concepts, such as confidence and doubt, so that they can share this with others. And also they need to learn conventional ways, so expressions like in English, confidence and doubt, that they can map onto these private metacognitive feelings that they experience. And here we have very little data on this, but we can guess that parental feedback is very important, and that like children learn words for objects, there is probably also mechanisms of cross-situational learning that occur for metacognitive words, where parental feedback occurring simultaneously with specific metacognitive feelings that the child is experiencing probably come and shape these metacognitive feelings that initially are potentially just analog and continuous, and that become discrete through experiencing feedback from the parents that is discrete and maps with specific states, internal states, such as confidence or doubt. And this, I must say, is very speculative at the moment, and this is something that that I'm trying to investigate at the moment. So to conclude, I think we have at least preliminary evidence for this model where a core system of metacognition is in place quite early on in development and matures along with the maturation of prefrontal structures such as the anterior cingulate cortex and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. But environmental and social cultural shaping is instrumental in converting these core metacognitive representations that are essentially analog into discrete and socially, culturally situated metacognitive concepts that can be shared through language and so on. And this is all I wanted to say. So I thank you for your attention, and I want to thank my collaborators. Thanks.
Yeah, Louise, thank you so much for your great talks. So do you even have any question? Yeah, now go ahead.
So before others ask question, yeah, I really think that the asking for help paradigm is really ingenious. And I was wondering if that can be also extended or into a couple of different kind of paradigms, especially like ecological situation might have inspired you to look into that in experimental paradigm, right? So in real life situation, do we know that whether infants or even younger infants than you studied, do they ask for help or ask for opinion to parents spontaneously, or also similar thing can be said about animals as well, like at least mammals, they grow with mother, right? So I can imagine that they also utilize mother as a source of the knowledge to make sure whether things are likely to work or not, and so asking for help seems to be quite promising tool, I thought. Do you know anything about that?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, every time I talk to a primatologist, I ask them, can we do a study about this? And they often say it's very, 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 very difficult to do this. Mm-hmm. So I haven't met one who told me, oh yeah, I know exactly how to do it, let's do it so far. And also they have told me that apparently this hasn't really been done apart from observational data and qualitative data. It's quite difficult to set up a paradigm like this one that we have set up. So I don't know, hopefully someone will we'll take up this challenge and we can answer that question in the future. But to answer your first question, yes, we know that. So that behavior that I described where toddlers turn towards their caregiver, this has been described in the literature quite a lot as social referencing. And traditionally, it has been thought to reflect affective seeking comfort and some affective processes, and this has been studied a lot in the framework of attachment theory. But more recently, we have started to understand that actually sometimes this is children deploy this behavior because they want comfort, but actually sometimes they deploy this because they want information. So there is another more recent study by, for instance, Bazide and colleagues, where they have shown that 12 months old already deploy this behavior when they are unsure about the potential reference of a word. So if there are two objects, novel objects, and they hear another word, they will look more towards someone who's informative, so provides a label for the object, for instance, as opposed to someone who's not informative. So this is another example, and there are a couple of more studies now that tells us that at least towards the end of the first year of life, children start to do this to request information through gaze.
I see. So the lower bound is around the end of the first year. So then, unfortunately, that cannot be used to distinguish the behavior that yeah.
So
yeah.
I think it's something that you could start using around 12 months. And before that, it will be difficult because babies don't really do that spontaneously before.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Yeah, I have one question. So, in the stage of core metacognition, infants are consciously represented the contents of the knowledge, or implicitly, unconsciously present. So, what do you think in the core metacognition, infants are conscious or non-conscious?
So that's a really great question. I think at the moment we don't have a definite answer as to whether core metacognitive signals must be consciously experienced or not. So what I do is I distinguish core metacognitive signals for which we can be agnostic from metacognitive feelings, which are consciously experienced core metacognitive signals. And the reason I'm cautious with this is that we know that, for instance, the error-related negativity can be evoked, even when you don't introspectively detect that you have made an error.
Right.
So it seems to be the case that at least some core metacognitive signals may be orthogonal with awareness. And it's quite an interesting question, what their relationship with awareness is actually, and I think we don't really have the answer at the moment.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's very difficult. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, the other question is, you said the parental feedback is maybe important for the development from the core metacognition and to the shared cognition. So it's a really great idea and very interesting. So do you have any pilot or suggestive evidence to support this in infants or young children or older kids? Do you have any evidence?
Yeah, so at the moment I don't have any evidence. So this is something that I'm planning to do, so to look at this directly.
Right.
But what we know is that we have indirect evidence for this in the sense that there is quite a lot of work in the mind reading literature showing that parental language is instrumental in shaping theory, mind reading. So passing the false belief task verbally, so on and so forth. And we also know that the false belief task, passing the false belief task verbally is related to apparent reality and so on. So it's very indirect evidence, but I think it's at least suggesting that it's a potential pathway. And now we need to do the studies to actually show that it's the case, but in progress.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, it's really interesting. Good.
Should I now introduce you, Yusuke?
Do you have any other question? Okay. So, Louise, thanks so much. Your great talk.
Thank you.
Okay, please introduce me.
All right. So that our last speaker is today's organizer, Yusuke Moriguchi, and the title of his talk will be, you go to the first one, representing an invisible agent during an early childhood. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for introducing me. So my name is Yusuke Moriguchi from Kyoto University. Today I'm talking about this research entitled Representing an Invisible Agent During Early Childhood. So actually, this is not mainstream consciousness research, I guess. But I believe, actually, this is studies about children representing invisible agent or imaginary companion. I believe this phenomenon is related to the children's unique consciousness experience and which is different from adults. So I believe this is a really interesting and important topic to address. So I hope you may have some interest in this kind of research topic. So previous studies have shown children develop the sensitivity to non-human agents during early childhood. Of course, human infants have the sensitivity to agent or real human from the beginning of the infancy, but children also have the sensitivity to the non-human agents such as ball or stick or something like that. For example, this study is reported by Gargari Chibra, and this study children assign some goal or intention or some desire to non-human agents like balls. So similar kind of results are reported by many researchers in the last decades. But this research is about the children's sensitivity to non-human agent, but apparently object basis. But children sometimes have the sensitivity to an invisible agent or imaginary agent, which is referred to as imaginary companion. For example, these kids have some interaction with the invisible agent, and they can interact, they can talk, or they can something like that. So imaginary companion is defined as an invisible character named and referred to in conversation with other persons, or played with directly for a period of time, several months, having an air of reality for the kids, but no apparent object basis. So this part, so having a air of reality for the kids, it's really, really interesting. So children may have some realistic experience when interacting with imaginary companion or imaginary agent. So I'm very interested in this kind of issue in this study. Previous study, actually I have conducted a meta-analysis of prevalence of imaginary companion. This actually represents the proportion of the kids who have imaginary companion, IC. This study is conducted in Japan, Australia, European, and USA. Actually, there are some type of the imaginary companion, but overall, children in several cultures have the likely to have imaginary companion. Actually, about half, like 50% of the kids, actually, especially preschool kids, are likely to have imaginary companion during early childhood. So these kind of results may show that the imaginary companion or invisible agent is not a special case, very common during early childhood. So this study is very important for the child development, I guess. Previous studies have shown characteristics of children who have IC, like sex differences, where girls are more likely to have imaginary companion than boys, or birth order effect, where the firstborn kids or only child are likely to have imaginary companion compared to other kids. While there are some reports that maltreated kids are likely to have imaginary companion. So previous study have something like this, but children seem to have there is some anecdotal evidence that children seem to have visual or auditory experience of IC. For example, some kids reported that they can see imaginary companion's face or hair or clothes. Other kids are reported that they can talk with, they can hear the voice of imaginary companions things. This is a little bit scary, but for me, these results kind of seem to show that the children have some realistic experience of imaginary companion things. So my research question is whether or not young children have realistic perceptual experience of invisible agent or imaginary companion things. We need to define what is reality, perceptual reality. So this definition is by the psychiatry. There are several qualities of perceptual reality, but I take two examples here. So one quality is sensation. So sensation is perceived in external sensory modality like vision, audition. And the other characteristic is publicness. This something can be experienced by other. So apparently, this publicness is not applied to imaginary companion, but sensation can be applied to the experience of imaginary companion. So in this study, we examine whether children's experience had the quality of sensation or perception using an eye tracking system. So this slide is really important. So I'd like you to hear carefully this slide. So special definition of realistic perception. So children are regarded as experiencing realistic perception when they produce the same involuntary behavior when presented with an invisible agent as when presented with a real agent. Let me explain this. So when you are observing another person, so real person's action, you may show some specific behavior toward a real human. Especially in this study, gaze pattern. So you may show some gaze pattern when you observe another person's action. But such kind of action are not observed when you are alone because you don't observe any actions. So our logic is if you show some similar gaze pattern when you are presented with the invisible agent, the experience is very similar in both situations. That is our logic. So let me explain again. So you may show some gaze pattern. Actually, in this study, gaze pattern toward the face. So you may show some gaze pattern toward the face when you observe another person's action. But such gaze pattern is not observed you are alone, right? So if we find a similar gaze pattern toward the face when you are presented with an invisible agent, these kind of experiences are similar. So which is our logic in this study. But the problem is it is very difficult to recruit children's own IC in an experimental situation. Children cannot call for their imaginary companion in the experimental room. So we set a semi-experimental situation where experimenter had an IC imaginary companion and examine children's response to the experimenter's imaginary companion. So this is indirect experimental situation, which is not good, but this is our attempt to examine this kind of issue. So experimenter introduces kids, here is an invisible agent, Hikaru, or something like that, and I'll ask you some question about this. So which is our experimental situation in this study. So we conducted 3 studies. So in first experiment, we confirmed that the children's gaze pattern when children observe the human's action. So we measured gaze towards the human's face while observing a human's action in experiment 1. So in the video, this person moves the ball towards the starting point here to the goal like this. So we measured gaze pattern and face interrupt the gaze pattern from here to here. So in experiment 2, we examine the similar gaze pattern while presented an invisible agent in experimental 2 and experimental 3. So in experimental 2 and 3, no one is here, but the ball moves from the starting point to the goal, something like this. So if we found similar gaze pattern in experimental 2 and experimental 2 and 3, children may similar perceptual experience in both situations. So we set the 2 experimental situations. So non-phase condition and phase condition. This is a phase condition. So there is a phase. Wait 1 second. This is a non-phase condition. So as you see, this is a starting point from the ball to the buckets, but there is no phase in this non-phase condition. So children and adults gaze were from the starting point directly to the goal like this. So it's very fast. Like this. From the starting point directly to the goal. But in the phase condition, there is a phase. So phase interferes this gaze pattern. So from the starting point to the phase, and to the goal. So the speed from the starting point to the goal is slowed in the phase condition compared to the non-phase condition. So we tested this hypothesis in experiment 1. So this is the result of the study. So y-axis represents speed of the gaze toward goal. So higher represented faster. So this is the result of the non-phase condition and phase condition. Black bar represents adults and white bar represents children. So as you see in the non-phase condition, both adults and kids show the faster gaze pattern compared to the phase pattern, phase condition. So gaze from the starting point to the goal was slowed in the presence of a phase in experiment 1. This is not surprising because previous study have supported this kind of results. So this is just precondition in study 2 for study 2 and 3. So presence of phase interfere with the gaze in both adults and kids. So we examine whether the same effect can be observed when participants were presented an invisible agent or imaginary agent. So experimental 2, we recruited adults because adults do not have experience of imaginary companion or invisible agent. So we assume that adults do not show similar gaze pattern in ghost move in the experimental 2. So we conducted this study. So in experimental 2, human movie is shown as in the experimental 1. Then ghost movie is presented. In the ghost movie, no one is there, but the ball moves from the starting point to the goal. So in the imagination condition, so participants are asked to imagine a person moving the goal. In the ball condition, participants are asked to follow the movement of the ball. So we examine whether the gaze pattern is differ between conditions in experiment 2. And we found no significant difference between conditions. Again, y-axis represents speed of the gaze toward the goal, but adults do not show the difference between conditions in experiment 2. So no effect of imagining a person in adults. How about kids? So we recruited 3 to 6-year-old kids, and we conducted a similar experiment to the experiment 2. So in this study, in this experiment, children are presented with a cover story. So introduce an invisible agent, after which a human movie is shown, then ghost movie is shown. There are 3 conditions actually in experiment 3. In the invisible condition, so Hikaru will move the ball in the movie. In the ball condition, participants are asked to follow the movement of the ball. But we added an additional control condition because simply imagining something may affect gaze pattern. So we set a fun condition where children were asked to imagine a fan during the ghost movie. So children are asked to imagine a fan during the watching this video. So this is a example of the experiment. So in the model condition, children are asked to follow the movement of the ball. So from the starting point to the so children trace the movement of the ball like this. So this from the starting point to the goal is fast, relatively fast. But the invisible condition, children are asked to imagine Hikaru-kun. So this is a first. Children gaze like face-related region like this. So their gaze pattern is slow in the invisible condition, which we found in this experiment 3. Again, higher represented the faster speed of the gaze toward the goal. So compared to the ball condition and fan condition, children's gaze was slowed in the invisible condition. So this result is very similar to experiment 1. So we assume that the children's gaze was slowed because children invisible agent face may interfere with children's gaze pattern. So the result may support our hypothesis. Additionally, we conduct a case study of fMRI. This is just one example, so very special case. Maybe this is a special case, but a 9-year-old girl who has an imaginary companion. This is her imaginary companion, Moon's aunt. So she can see and she can interact with this imaginary friend, imaginary companion things. So we conducted a similar experiment in the fMRI scanner. So there is a human condition and the imaginary condition. So given our eye tracking study, we assume that the children may activate face-related region during the imaginary and human movie in this study. So like FFA or something like that. But we found no activation in the face-related region in this study. But children activated precuneus, which is related to the visual image or mentalizing or theory mind in both human condition and imaginary condition. Actually, yellow region is the activated region in the human condition, like this, and the blue region is related to the activation in the imaginary condition. So this precuneus is overlapped region in both human and imaginary condition. The previous study have shown children with imaginary companion shows better performances in mentalizing or theory of mind tasks than those without IC. So our result may be consistent with this previous result. So this is just a case study, so we cannot overgeneralize this result, but this kind of research can be helpful to think about the perceptual reality of imaginary companions. So summary, children's gaze was slowed by imagining a person as well as by observing a person. And our case fMRI study has showed similar brain regions are activated while observing humans and IC's action. So this is maybe too early, but the children may have some realistic perceptual experience of invisible agent. But this is still this is a just tentative conclusion, so we need to address this kind of issue in future. So go back to the definition of reality. So our result may at least partly support that sensation can be applied, partially applied to the experience of imaginary companion. Actually, this is not directly related to this talk, but recently, you have experienced COVID-19 pandemic all over the world. Our result may be some indication of the children's daily life. Actually, we have conducted examined the prevalence of imaginary companion before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. As you see, a little bit white dot represented the prevalence of IC before the pandemic, and black bar represented the black dot represented the prevalence of imaginary companion during the COVID-19 pandemic. So as you see, the prevalence of IC is some increase during the pandemic compared to the before the pandemic. So I think this is really indicative to think about children's experience, daily life. Perhaps school closure or lack of peer interaction, children may feel some loneliness in the interaction in terms of the peer relationship. But I see imaginary companion can compensate for the peer relationship during the pandemic. So I see can help your kids during the pandemic. This is not the main issue, but this is really interesting things for me. So I just share with you. So anyhow, this is that's all my talk. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was quite an impressive result. So do you have any question? Maybe I can start. So about the results on the eye tracking, I think that's quite a clever kind of experiment again. And you said that it's not like everybody experiences imaginary companion, right? So does the effect of the eye movement also dependent on the degree that children actually reports seeing IC, or a belief or strength of the belief that they see, the agent?
Right. Yeah, it should be. But we just examine the children, whether or not children have imaginary companion using questionnaire, but we didn't find the effect of the children's having imaginary companion. So children who have or who have not didn't differ in terms of the eye tracking data. So, but maybe we can collect in other way. I don't know exactly, but yeah, we should examine another type of data, maybe more. Actually, imaginary companions who have or who have not just dichotomy, so which is not so good to detect the relationship. So I guess more gradual measures should be more desirable, I think. Yeah.
I see, like a scores in the questionnaire or something like that. Yeah, that would be good. All right, Yusuke?
Okay, so thank you for very interesting talk. So I have one question. So I am wondering if there is a relationship between imaginary companion and kind of hallucination in some patients, like schizophrenia. So so hallucination in schizophrenia patient. So they some theory hypothesize that they hear their own thought because they do not have a sense of self-agency.
Right.
So do you have any idea about that?
Actually, if I talk this kind of research, people say that imaginary companion is related to the hallucination or illusion or delusion, something like that. But generally, schizophrenia is related to the more, auditory experience, as you said, right? But the imaginary companion is more related to the visual experiences, which is, I think, a little bit different from the auditory hallucination. But in children, mostly children the major component is related to the 4 or 5-year-old kids. So self-agent, in terms of self-agency, children have some mirror self, they can, you know, they can have the mirror self-recognition, but self-agency is, I think, still developing. So in terms of this, but I don't know, yeah. It's very, I guess it's very different from the schizophrenia. Yeah, sorry, I cannot answer a very good question. But
I see.
Yeah,
I see. Thank you.
Before taking the next question, I just wanted to put this slide up so that during the Q&A, if you like, you can also start inputting your feedback onto this questionnaire, Google form as well. And Louise, please.
Thanks for the great talk. I was wondering if you thought about the fact that also it could be that they are looking for someone because you told them there's someone, whereas the in your study, so like not necessarily seeing someone there, but just looking for someone because you told them someone is there, and adults don't do that because they just don't believe you.
Okay, so you mean my looking pattern is not necessarily reflect the trends experience of realistic perception or something? Yeah, sorry.
I mean, no, I'm just wondering if it's really that they are seeing that there's someone there, or imagining there's someone there, as opposed to because you told them there's someone there and they can't see that person, just like looking for signs that the person is there, if you see what I mean.
Right. Sorry, I'm still not clear for me, but
because you know in terms of the condition experimental interaction, experimenter said that there should be somebody, but because the children knows or experience that they don't see them, they are trying to seeking for, searching for some evidence that right?
Right. I see. That's a really good question. So actually, yeah, you are right. So I cannot exclude this possibility per se. Yeah, but our adult data do not show the difference between conditions. So yeah, but children are more interested in the our verbal interaction, right? So, I see. Yeah, currently I cannot exclude this possibility. So how can I exclude?
You know that there was a very interesting study on the lucid dream, which used a kind of similar idea that you actually use. So in actual, in the waking life, if you try to imagine something moving circle,
right,
and then you try to follow that with your gaze,
right,
then you can't just do that. It becomes like a saccade. But if you are actually seeing, in the dream, lucid dream, things are moving continuously like that, then I can actually follow that things. So something like that. I don't know. Only when you see things, express the behavior. That's the kind of the thing that you want to try to find, right? I don't know whether that saccade versus smooth pursuit may be one way to.
Right. Right. Actually, I was planning to do similar experiment before, but I don't know. I don't remember. I cannot complete this experiment. But yeah. That's one possibility to pass this direction. Yeah. Thanks for your suggestion and comments.
Okay. Is there any other comments or a question? Do we have anything on YouTube? That's fine, I guess.
Maybe, yeah, evening time, maybe dinner time. So,
but surprisingly, the number of the audience actually remained quite high from the beginning until now, really, in both Zoom and also YouTube. So it was quite a great, successful symposium.
Yeah. So, can we close?
Yeah. Maybe. Do you want to say something? Closing remark, please.
Maybe you are preparing some.
This is closing remark for the other symposium. So.
Okay. So now we are closing this symposium. So thanks so much for speaker. All talk is really interesting and fascinating. So yeah, it's great to have the opportunity to have this development of consciousness. Some of the speaker is a little bit cautious about the use of consciousness. I understand it because I'm not still expert in consciousness. So, but this is a really interesting topic, and also there are few research about the development of consciousness still. So we need to proceed this kind of study in future. So this is I hope that this is an opportunity to broaden the possibility of the consciousness research in infants and young kids. So thanks so much for the audience. Thanks so much for joining this symposium. It's really great. So thanks so much. So and Tsuya-san, do you have any comments on this?
Maybe I'll just say one thing. So I'm quite impressed by that. First of all, maybe starting from this psychophysical kind of invention, I was quite impressed by Yusuke's experiment too, to say that if they don't perceive the masking, then other way around of the behavioral performance should be observed, and then that's what you observed. And I think that was really brilliant. That's the way to sort of demonstrate this effect very convincingly. And also similarly, Louise's asking for help paradigm is really brilliant, I would say. And then of course, Yusuke's your involuntary eye movement to infer what the children are experiencing, and probably some of these sort of frontier psychophysics ideas and techniques can be imported into some of the animal experiments, I hope, right, Yumiko-san? Like, CAPEX study on the uncertainty monitoring has been, demonstrated in rats. And so I don't think no study has been conducted on the metacognition of the, in rats in a really early developmental phase, right? Yeah, that's going to be very difficult. But I guess, as Yusuke said, consciousness itself is already quite challenging, but, understanding developing consciousness is very interesting and also quite critical issue, both clinically and also ethically, like issue of the newborn babies and so on. So I think that will be quite an important field to move on, and also we'll see many interesting development in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, all speaker and audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, you're top.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.